Okay, I'm eating. Nom, 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 nom. Hi, everybody. You can only imagine the noises that are coming over the thing. Nom, nom, nom. Okay. Welcome to Bible study.
Slurp, slurp.
I am just trying to polish off our wonderful dessert for tonight. Aiden, if you would please, that is a walnut rhubarb. Walnut rhubarb bread with salted caramel topping. And it is delicious. Success. So yes, welcome everybody online. Good to have you. Hopefully, so you guys online, hopefully the audio will be better for you this time.
Yeah.
I think we found the culprit was a faulty microphone. Oof! I just bent over and I looked in the live feed and I saw my bald spot back there. It's like, oof. Okay. Anyway. All right. What are we going to do here tonight? So. Oh. Here, Carrie. There's a message. Yum, hope there's something good next week. So, yeah, you've been called out. You got to bring the A game now. Well, if she was smart, she would put in some, suggestions like. Now, my personal no. All right, so this has been an interesting roundabout way to get to the Reformation, and tonight we're actually going to get right to the cusp of it. I think. So there's just so much, obviously, so much history, and there's so much that goes on. So we're going to kind of cover, again, a little bit, summarizing some of this stuff. So something with cherries. I'll just leave it at that. So we're actually going to talk a little bit tonight about, okay. So basically we're getting into we're going to cover probably the 1200s to the 1400s. And really where we're going to see a lot of the stage is getting set for Martin Luther. And you're going to see how he was by no means, like special in that, like, the reforms he was talking about or even the things that he was complaining about. You'll see that he was not the first. But there's a few things to talk about. So, let's see. So in 800, this was kind of a big kind of point in church history, and that's with Charlemagne. And kind of Charlemagne did a lot of stuff. Wasn't necessarily all bad. There was some good, some bad. But really the thing that really changes here with Charlemagne, which sets the stage for a lot of the conflict for the next, 600 years, is with Charlemagne you get the mingling of church and state. And this is where Charlemagne was, the Pope crowned him at St. Peter's in Rome. So that was like a whole new thing where a Pope was kind of assuming that authority to invest it upon the emperor. And basically Charlemagne kind of took that and he established a lot of his authority over things and pushed a lot of his authority onto the church. And so what begins here is this push back and forth between the papacy, which has over time and by this time has started gaining more authority, exercising more authority, and the kings, the Holy Roman Emperor mainly, but then as time goes on, the various kings of the various countries, they're going to be fighting over who really has ultimate authority, because the Pope has apostolic succession. The king is divinely appointed. Who wins? And unfortunately, throughout most of the history there, who wins? Well, there's usually some bloodshed. There's a lot of stuff going on. Popes are deposed. Kings are murdered. The usual. It's nothing special. But that's kind of a big deal. So to see some of the fun that transpires here, we've got 996. So we've got Gregory the Fifth. All right, he becomes the first German pope. And I really don't have that much to say about him, except that he was appointed by his cousin, Otto III. So, Otto III was crowned king of Germany in 983 at the age of 3. So King Otto, at age 3, now this is what I think he's 16 years old when he appoints his cousin as pope. So, from Charlemagne, who the Pope, crowned Charlemagne as the emperor. And now you've got the Pope, who was appointed. So the king then appoints his own cousin to be the Pope. So you've got a lot of fun stuff going on. And there's a lot of dynastic kind of elements going on here. During the thousands into the 1200s, here you're going to see the rise of kind of the states, or the countries, France, Spain, Italy are kind of coalescing as countries. Kings are beginning to take over these areas, strong kings. Into the 1300s, 1400s, this is when you start to get the dynasties. And into the 1500s, like in England, you've got the Tudors and all the other English monarch lines and families. You've got 1095 is when essentially kind of the first Council of Clement, or Clermont rather, where Pope Urban had this wonderfully rousing speech that eventually led to the First Crusade, because the Muslims had taken over the Holy Land. So 1095, the crusades officially kind of started a little bit later, but that was kind of the initiation of the Crusades. And so, that was a fun time. The Crusades were great, right? We could do a whole study of those. It's entertaining in a very morose, macabre kind of way. The first crusade, the first round of them they weren't really soldiers. The first round of crusaders, they were, peasants, farmers who were whipped up into a religious fervor and basically, sent out into the chopping fields. Didn't end well for them. Over time in the Crusades, you get more organized people coming, armies are raised up, and we have knights, and we can talk about all them. The fun thing is, broadly speaking, with the Crusades, is you've got the Christian forces that come in and they liberate the Holy Land, and they liberate Jerusalem, and they start establishing little areas around in that place. What gets fun is that first round of Christian liberators, They kind of come in and they see the way that the Eastern, the Muslim kind of world lived, and they're like, hey, that's kind of sweet. They have a lot of good ideas, and they especially the way they dress is kind of cool, and so actually the first wave of Crusaders start to kind of take on a lot of the lifestyle, or at least appearance-wise, of the Muslim conquerors. So much so that even when another round of Crusaders come. Some of those first round of Crusaders actually sided with the Muslims. It got really weird. And there was, obviously a lot of bloodshed, a lot of fighting. It was not a pretty time. But there was just, nothing was clear cut. It wasn't and if anybody's like, Crusades, it's like, whoa. I mean, you're talking about a long, long series of events with a lot of weird dynamics.
Israel as a country was
Oh, we're not getting into this, are we? We're not getting into this, are we?
no.
We're going to be canceled. No, come on now.
I mean,
Sorry.
Before World War II, it was kind of just like a desolate, unclaimed area. And what was the interest in the Crusades? I'm a little in the dark.
Well, the Crusades was I mean, primarily was liberating the Holy Land. Islam came in, and I mean, it just swept over throughout all the East. Now, Constantinople was the holdout until pretty late, I think 14, 15 something. But everything else, like Islam, just came through and just took over, and even to this. Went into Spain and was getting into France before Charlemagne's dad or grandfather was the one who actually beat them out.
What was the point of power where was the seat of power for the Islamic forces?
For the Islamic forces, I don't know. I would assume Mecca, Medina. I don't know. Having had most of my education here, we usually focus on the Western side of it. We get very little of the Islamic side.
The big picture, my only exposure really to this in recent years was art history. So
Oof! Wow, yeah.
it's fascinating. It's beautiful.
It's wild. There's a lot of weird stuff that comes out of it. You get the orders of knights, the Teutonic Knights, the Knights Templar, hospital. Where's? There you go. Thank you. So yeah, you got the orders of knights came out of that to fight the Crusades. So there's a lot. The Crusades produce a lot of stuff, and like I said, we could do a whole study about it. It's fascinating, and just whew. But suffice to say, there was a lot of stuff going on.
So how long did the Crusades last?
Oh, quite a while. Gosh.
Talking a couple hundred years, or?
Oh wait, Matt has something here. Hey Matt, how long did the Crusades officially last? He says he's actually read some Muslim primary sources from the Crusades, and they basically see the Crusaders as barbarians. Which, which, I mean, that goes both ways. The Christian side or the Western side saw the Islamic, they were invaders. They were, they had to be stamped out, and then the Muslim side certainly saw the Crusaders as barbarians, which, whipped up in a religious fervor to liberate the Holy Land. I'm sure there was horrible, horrible things done.
Why was it called? Why the Holy Land? Why was it considered?
Well, because Jerusalem, that was where.
Jerusalem, even though
Yeah.
it had been burned by Rome, it was still considered
Oh, absolutely.
of importance.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, and even with Rome having come in 70 to burn it, over time and rebuilding and establishing churches, and I mean that was huge. So yeah. When Islam came in, I mean that's what they did. It's like they either destroy or converted the churches, turn them into mosques, whatever, which is
Sacrilegious to the Christians.
oh yeah. And vice versa. So when you get religions fighting like that, it never ends well for anybody. So yeah, Matt said, easy answer is 1096 to 1272, so 200 years. But again, it's like there's some fuzziness there, so give or take 200 years. Long stretch. And it went in waves. There were several waves. It wasn't just one crusade. It was several. So yeah, that's going on. You got the schism between the East and the West. So you got the split of the church. You've got, oh boy, what do we really want to talk about there? So, let's jump to 1215 because nothing happened for 200 years. It's notable. This is where we get the Fourth Lateran Council. And the reason why I bring this one up is because you see in 1215 in this council that they were they were already trying they were including a lot of reforms, or at least trying to include reforms in their deliberations. So usually councils were, we're dealing with this heresy, let's clean up this teaching, this guy needs to go, that kind of stuff. The Fourth Lateran Council, you see a lot more reform work kind of happening. And so some of that was bishops who permit scandals in the church are to lose their office forever, which is quite hilarious to think about that because there were so many scandals. But the idea there were like, hey, we need to clamp down on this stuff and we can't go easy on it. Clergy are to be soberly dressed. This was fun. So clergy are supposed to wear, the garment they're supposed to wear was not too long, not too short, fastened at the neck. And I don't know why, because I didn't research this, because it was just too fun. No red or green cloth. I'm sure there was a reason. Don't know. The trial by ordeal was prohibited, so no more dunking people underwater and seeing if they float. They started to or instituted some inquisitorial procedures. So this is how you'd properly do an inquisition for dealing with heresy. And basically, if you didn't renounce whatever your heresy was, you were excommunicated. And we'll jump ahead a bit because not every inquisition is the same. There were papal inquisitions, which were, well, when you think Inquisition, what do you think? Probably the Spanish Inquisition, right? And come on, Monty Python here. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Gotta love it. The Spanish Inquisition is the one I think that whenever anybody thinks Inquisition, that's one. And it's like torture, it is cruelty, it is the bloodthirsty church torturing people. The thing about the Spanish Inquisition is that it was a state-sponsored Inquisition. It was not a papal, church-sponsored Inquisition. Now, granted, it was pursuing heretics as the way they saw it. But a lot of actually Orthodox Christians got caught up in it because it was state-sponsored. The popes during that time, or the Pope, actually appealed to Spain several times in certain circumstances, being like, hey, guys, cut it out. And Spain was like, ah. So Inquisitions weren't just kind of universally horrific. At its core, an Inquisition was, hey, you're a heretic. you're teaching heresy. You need to either renounce it or you're out. So it was a way to kind of clear up doctrine. It wasn't always, excommunication was a desired penalty. It could, here's the problem. Here's the problem. When you got church and state mingling so much, what you have is heresy, in a lot of times, is actually considered a capital crime. It's not just a religious church crime, because these are so tightly wound. Oftentimes it's like a capital crime. And the problem with that is that sometimes if you refused to renounce, not only were you excommunicated, but depending on what the deal was, you could be imprisoned, you can have your property taken, you could be killed. Because oftentimes what would happen was a statesperson, a layperson essentially, would be in charge of the trial, and they might not know a lot about theology. So there was some issues with that. The fun thing is about with the papal inquisitions is that actually what they did was, most people think, oh, inquisitions, they were just about killing heretics. They actually, if you want to be fair to it, a lot of times they actually helped people live because they were trying to keep heretics from being killed en masse, because what would often happen is if you had a small town and somebody was accused of heresy, what do you think the townspeople would do to them?
Kill 'em.
Yes. They'd burn them. They'd do all sorts of crazy things to them. And that was bad, obviously. This kind of vigilantism. So by kind of establishing an inquisitorial procedure, the church was trying to kind of normalize the process and be like, hey, guys, instead of just because that person made some bread that made you sick, and you're saying they're heresy or whatever, or they said, well, maybe whatever. Maybe instead of throwing them off the cliff, we try them in our courts, and then we'll deal with it. It's like, oh, okay. So inquisitions, if you get nothing out of this class, inquisitions, they're not that bad. Necessarily. In spirit, initially, they weren't supposed to be that bad. Abuses did occur. All right. Also in this Fourth Lateran Council was the encouragement that Christians should receive the Lord's Supper at least once a year, at least on Easter. So at that point, Christians weren't necessarily even receiving the Lord's Supper regularly, like at all, in the course of a year. So Christians should at least get it on Easter. So that was a problem. Private confession must remain private. That was one of them too. So there were things going on in the church that they needed to correct. Priests were telling secrets. Priests were, or bishops, whatever. So there was a lot of stuff that was like, okay, we're getting out of control. Let's reform. Let's clamp down a little bit. So you do see some of this happening. The problem, really, is that okay. Let me see here. 1300s. You start to see kind of the rise of nationalism. French people are like, we're French and we're proud of it. Germans are like, we're Germans. English are, we're English. The previously up until that point, it was pretty fractured, but there's like this. There was this unifying identity of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, yeah, you were in different areas, and you were kind of this French area, German area, whatever. But there was sort of this unifying factor. That was pretty much gone by the 1300s, and now local, nationalism is on the rise here. Strong monarchs are beginning to be more abundant, really willing to push the popes around, and still a lot of friction between them. At this time, there's also the emergence of things like parliaments, representative institutions. So you see the beginnings of a lot of different political, economic, socioeconomic, whatever. A lot of institutions are beginning to coalesce here. So there's a lot, if the papacy had to deal with, the king, okay, well now the papacy has to deal with the king, who has to also deal with parliament, and there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on, and there's power struggles all over the place. So you had, I'm glad I'm Irish. You had France, which was pretty much united, we're French, all right. Here's Britain over here. This is exactly how it looks too. Here's Italy, the boot, right? I didn't even have to tell you, and you'd know what that was, right? Come on, this is a map. Germany. So, we're all one. We're all one. We're all one. Germany was divided up into like 300, over 300 autonomous units. You Germans are crazy. Which I is worth pointing out, not just because I love poking at Germans, because come on, it's fun, but just that there's unity going on here, and they're rising up, and there's factions and all that. And here so this is France. This is where the Pope is for a long time. The Pope, he's in Avignon. This is kind of important as it leads to Martin Luther. Because as there's more friction going on between king and pope, and then kings and all that, what eventually happens is a lot of anti-pope guys, they'll get in trouble in all these places, and they'll go to Germany. Because Germany, there's a lot of Germans who shared the anti-pope feeling and didn't like him so much, and we'll get into some of the reasons for that. But Germany had kind of developed this history of protecting people who didn't like the Pope. So this Martin Luther, you can see how this is going to play well for him.
And he didn't come to be until about mid-1500s?
Yeah. So yeah, we're still 200 and some odd years away from Luther. So that's why the groundwork has been laid for Luther. how I'm not sure if this is a terrible example or not. I kind of liken Luther's kind of the environment he came into just being perfectly ripe for him is kind of how I felt coming into Ascension. How, hear me out. Yeah, knowing that there was struggle and conflict and then events way before me. And there was a lot of upheaval for a time. And even in leading up to the time I got here, there was conflict, whatever. But Dave Winningham, oversaw 10 years of bringing kind of some peace, and he dealt with a lot of stuff. And so when I got here, it was like, I'm like, this church everyone gets along so great. It's the nicest place ever, and everything just works. And exactly, I would tell people that, and they're like, oh, young lad, if only you knew. But that's kind of how I look at that. Is like, a lot of the groundwork was laid for him to just be perfect situation, perfect timing, and some other things, the Gutenberg press and all that. So there was a lot that really helped out with that. But yeah, it was very interesting the way it kind of was working out. You had during this time, you have this kind of rise, the focus on the emphasis on the individual is also kind of becoming more of a thing. You have a move from the rural areas to the city areas. So people are kind of leaving the farmlands and coming into the cities and populating those. A sense of individualism is kind of starting to percolate a bit more, which kind of leads into a feeling of like, hey, I should be able to, what do I have here? I should be able to have my own personal judgment over things like politics and religion, which, that's going to help feed a little bit there. The church, by and large, really still at that point was kind of an agrarian-based kind of thing. The country monastery, the little country parish that the bishops that oversaw the little rural populations. Well, those are emptying out. They're all going to the cities. So Rome is going to have an issue because all that income. Let's just call it what it is. They're losing money from all these parishes, and because they're going to the city, but I mean you're still losing out on a lot of stuff. So there's that. You've got 1337, give or take. You've got the 100 Years' War between England and France, which went on for 100 years, give or take. That was fun. And it wasn't like a sustained, like they were fighting constantly. It was kind of patchwork a little bit. But the fun thing about that is that, you've got a king in England, right? And a king in France. They're both, the Pope is over all of them, right? Well, now you've got these two fighting. Guess where the Pope lives? France. Can you imagine what will happen in England? So they're like, and they suspected, a lot of them suspected, and probably rightfully so, that the Pope was, favorable to France in the conflict. I mean, I can't imagine why later on the Church of England would come about. And honestly, it's like you think, oh, Henry VIII, like way before him. Seeds were planted way before him. So yeah, eventually, England will break away from the Catholic Church and start their own church, Church of England. So you've got all this happening. You've got a little deal called the Black Death. You've got that, which killed off about half the population of Europe. So that's not good. I mean, besides just there's impacts to the economy, there's impacts to everything with the Black Death. Religion obviously plays heavily into it. I mean, there are those who are like, well, this is a curse on us because this is God's punishment, blah blah blah. People ascribing it to various whatever. So it's not fun. There's a lot of peasant revolts during this time. There's a lot of madness going on. A lot of conflict. So, during this time, the Pope, the papacy, Is like, hey, we're losing money. We need, and again, the transition from a agrarian economy to a more of a capitalist style economy, and especially after the Black Death, inflation, phew! So money was crazy. So the church needed to have money. So one of the things that they start doing is they engage in a lot of questionable practices that weren't very popular. And some of these things were, let's see, we talked about this a little bit. The first year's income of a newly appointed bishop went to the Pope. So this was the decree. So anytime a bishop starts in a new parish, the first year of that bishop's income comes right to the Pope. So guess what happened?
Less bishops.
Oh no, not less bishops, but you move them around all the time.
Oh, go on.
Seriously.
What a scam.
Because it wasn't new bishops. It was just any time you have a bishop in a new place. So you can move them around. So, I mean, in theory, I suppose you could move one around every year, and basically the money all goes. But yeah, that was the deal.
So
Now,
the was never paid.
what's that?
So the bishops were never paid.
Well, I mean, they were supplied. You know, they were cared for. But yeah, I mean, it was a loss of that. The no new ones came through reservations, which is revenues from vacant dioceses reverted to the Pope so long as the vacancy existed. So there was an encouragement for the Pope not to, fewer bishops, because if you had a vacant parish, well, the papacy got the money so long as it was vacant. So let's keep it vacant. Meanwhile, with the other bishops, we'll just move them around. I mean, hey, it's if you're going to make some money, that's the way to do it. Expectancies. This was for a fee. A person was promised the right to succeed a church office following the incumbent's death. So, and I mean, I guess ideally you would have some kind of training, theological training or whatnot. But basically, if you said like, oh, hey, that, I don't know if it was a bishop or whatever church official. So you saw a church official, he was like, on death's door or like, yeah, okay. So I could pay or you could pay this fee to say like, okay, so I pay, so when he dies, I get his job. So they made money off of that. Commendation, which was for a fee, a bishop was permitted to receive revenues from a vacant diocese. Which I'm not really sure how that worked. Well, I guess, I don't even know, because if in a vacant diocese, the Pope would get the money. But then I guess a bishop could pay a fee so the money could go to him instead. I'm sure the Pope got a cut. The Pope's got to get his beak wet. He's got he's got to get his cut of it. So, and of course, indulgences, factor into the deal later too. And this was all just, it was bad. You're going to be shocked to learn that the system was just rife with abuse. I know, right? So that's all going on. And so a lot of people don't like this. Shocking, right? And part of the problem, see, this is the fun thing. Is that the papacy was kind of oftentimes their own worst enemy. Because in the midst of all this and kind of even probably before some of these financial things came into play, the church is kind of noticing that, it's people, we're losing people and the state of the parishes is not good. Bishops weren't necessarily good preachers. Pastoral care was lacking. I mean, it was pretty bad. The quality of pastoral support was low. And so they're seeing all these issues, and that's a problem. So what happens is we have the rise of the friar. All right. So a friar, which I think just means brother. So you think your Dominicans, your Dominican friars, your Augustinian friars, your Franciscan friars. These are religious orders that sort of naturally coalesced, that the papacy kind of adopted or kind of officially gave their sanction to. So basically what was happening was so Where am I going to go here? Saint Francis. Francis of Assisi. Francis. Okay. He starts the Franciscans. Named so because St. Francis. All right, so Francis was the son of a wealthy merchant who became dissatisfied with his life. You know, he's like, it's just this aimless life of leisure. Oh, woe was me. It's like, Francis, shut up, enjoy it. But he was, well, to his credit, you know, he's like, this isn't good. So during a serious illness, he devoted his life to service of the poor. And you know, and you know, under the Christian kind of, you know, so he's a raised Christian, and he gathers some like-minded people. So he begins kind of this grassroots organization order to deal with the poor, to take care of the poor. Pope Innocent III confirmed the new order in 1209, so a little bit before this. So this is 1209. So he confirms the order. And this is great because their specialty is going into all the ghettos of these new cities that are popping up, and they serve the poor. Because they dedicate their life to it. And they've taken they're kind of eschewing their ascetic lifestyle, so they kind of eschew all the trappings of wealth and all that, and they go in to serve the poor. Also, they place a high priority on good preaching. They kind of revive preaching as a useful and good thing. So this is serving the poor, serve and preaching. So the Pope confirms that and says, yes, this is good. This helps our bottom line. You've got Dominic of Guzman, who forms the Dominicans. All right, he's a native of Spain. He founded what is called the Order of Friars Preachers. So their focus was really more intellectual, preaching, teaching, persuasion. And really preaching was their deal. And what they saw as their calling was to, this will purge the church of its heretical elements. This is why they're more focused on intellectual pursuits, preaching, and good theology. They get started in get commissioned or confirmed in 1216. So this is a big, huge thing that happens. And, you know, the papacy is like, this is great. This is going to be awesome. What happens is, the difference with these guys is that you have like bishops who are placed throughout, like, you know, our pastors, right? They're placed in individual congregations. They're stationary. That's where they are. And that's where they stay. These guys traveled. They were itinerant kind of guys. They went all over the place. So they could go and do whatever. So they would come in, and guess who really didn't, like, the people loved these guys. These guys friars were incredibly popular. Their numbers were just exploded because people loved them. Guess who didn't like them? Like, they would come into town where there was a small parish preacher. They hated these guys. They didn't, yeah, the bishops weren't exactly, the parish priests weren't exactly enthused with these guys. Honestly, because they come in and they were great preachers. And they were like, and this is kind of what happened. You know, you get a new guy comes in, it's like, oh, this guy's great. Not this old, you know, this priest we've had for years and years and years. Here's this fresh face guy. We like him. Now, it did have the nice effect sometimes where it would encourage the parish priest to, like, up their game. So, you know, it was good, and it did inspire some to kind of get better. But yeah, so there was a little bit of friction between the local guys and the friars who were going out. But the fun thing then was as time goes on, and especially as the papacy starts instituting all these like, hey, let's get more money. Guess who doesn't exactly like that? Especially these guys. Now they were never like cast out or whatever, because honestly the church had bigger fish to fry. But the interesting thing is that there does exist a lot of tension during this time between these guys, and it's so like the papacy embraces this and doesn't realize like, oh, they're probably not going to like some of this stuff. Like once you see how the sausage is made, yeah. So that's going to be some conflict there too. Oh, okay. It's a lot.
Were they organized into monasteries at that point?
Monasteries were all over the place. Monasteries were actually kind of falling by the wayside a little bit because they were all out in the countryside for the most part. So the friars, I think they could be based wherever because they were traveling. The deal was that they answered to the Pope versus like the parish priest who answered to the bishop who answered to there was like the hierarchy. The bishops were like down here and the Pope was way up here. These guys were like way up here under the Pope.
How did the friars then get the ear of the Pope? If the bishops were down here, it sounds like they fit into this power structure higher than the bishops.
Yeah, I don't know that they did. I mean, the Pope does what the Pope does. I don't know that the Pope had necessarily hands-on work with them. I don't know. I don't know the finer workings of that.
So they somehow had favor with the Pope in a way.
At times, yeah, until they started. Because as you get some of the reform-minded people who start to be called heretics, excommunicated, and burned at the stake. The fun thing is that the Franciscans and Dominicans sometimes actually shared a lot of their ideas, which would be dangerous, except that they were, they didn't go. They embraced some of those ideas, but they were so dead set against heresy. So it's it was. I guess the papacy was able to overlook some of that because they did so much good for the church as a whole.
But who was overseeing their theology of the
Who's?
the Dominicans and the Franciscans? Who was overseeing their theology if they were the ones who took it upon themselves to come against heresy?
Who's overseeing it? Early on, I'll have to get back to you on that one. I mean, you've got situations like, I don't know if it's just kind of localized, talking about the individuality and kind of and we'll get into scholasticism, and there was a whole lot of thinking going on and reevaluating stuff and trying to figure out how theology and reason all come together and how that works. Universities were on the rise, so you've got essentially the same sort of situation that people complain about today. We send our kids there and they're indoctrinated with whatever. It's universities weren't necessarily, owned by the churches. They had some fair amount of free thought going on there. And so the teachings that were going on in universities weren't necessarily fully sanctioned kind of stuff, where the Pope would be yeah. So there was a lot of stuff going on.
Who oversaw the Pope's theology?
God. Who oversees the Pope's theology? The Pope speaks for... No, the Pope is theology. Okay. Talking about some popes here. Let's see. Who do we have here? Oh, we can talk about when there were 3 popes. Okay, so the late 1300s, so late 13s to 14s, right? Okay, so like I said, there's all sorts of conflict and there's just madness going on. The Pope had been stationed in Avignon, France, for a while. And France was kind of like that. That was the big. France was the big boy. They were the primary one. And so the Pope was kind of the papacy was kind of kept there. The King of France liked him there because that the king could exert his own influence and authority over the Pope. In fact, I think the Catholic Church refers to the time in Avignon as the Babylonian captivity, because they were sort of locked in there. So in 1377, Gregory the 11th enters Rome. And this is the papacy goes back to Rome. So this is a huge shift. Okay, so 1377, Pope Gregory goes back to Rome and reestablishes the papacy in Rome. All right, 1377. The very next year he dies. All right. So the I love this. The College of Cardinals, or whatever it is, the majority of them, guess what nationality they were? I lost my picture. French. Yes. Because the Pope had been French, and the king, who oversaw the Pope, and there was a lot of the Pope could say, or there was conflict who could appoint bishops, the king or the Pope. Didn't matter if it was in France, either way. So yeah, the majority of the cardinals were French. However, now the Pope is in Rome, or the papacy is in Rome, so the Romans who were there, who were part of the college there, they threatened the cardinals to elect an Italian pope. They're like, we're done with this French nonsense. So they threaten the French guys and say, you better elect an Italian pope or else. So they get Urban the Sixth. They elect Urban the Sixth to pope. Here's what I believe is a quote from someone in that time. Speaking of Urban, they said, he lacked Christian gentleness and charity. He was naturally arbitrary and extremely violent and impudent, and when he came to deal with the burning ecclesiastical question of the day, that of reform, the consequences were disastrous. So, they elect a pope who is just a nightmare. The French cardinals are all pissed off, so they leave. So they go off, and they take their ball, and they're going home. So the French cardinals, they get together outside. They depose Urban and choose Clement VII, and then they reestablish the papacy at Rome. Okay, well, Urban's like, no, I'm not abdicating this. So at that point, you have two popes. You have one in Rome, you have one in France. Can you imagine that went well? So this is highlighting a lot more conflict and whatnot. So the church until 1417 is divided with two popes. 1409, the College of Cardinals managed to finally kind of come together and announce a general council. They couldn't get any councils agreed upon. So they finally get one in Pisa. They deposed both popes. They're like, enough of this foolishness. Both popes are gone. They elected Alexander V to succeed them. Guess who didn't recognize the validity of that council? Urban and Clement. So guess how many popes you have now? You got three popes.
Where
So,
did the third one go?
I didn't read where it was a council in Pisa, so I assume Italy somewhere.
So this was the start of urban renewal?
No, this was urban decay. John is smiling down on you right now. Yeah, okay. That was good. So then we get eventually a few years later, we get the Council of Constance. Everybody knows about that one, right? So this is where Martin V is elected as true pope in 1417. Deposed all the three popes. So they're like, you know what? Nope, we're clearing the slate. Martin V is elected as true pope. He promises to reform all of those money-making schemes. So Martin comes in and says, okay, we're going to reform all this stuff. We're going to either get rid of it or make it not as shady and terrible. Condemned over 200 propositions of John Wycliffe, who we'll talk about in a moment. This is fun. So John Wycliffe was a reformer-minded guy from England. He was dead at this point. So in order to condemn his propositions, they ordered his body to be exhumed because they were condemning him. So I guess he was buried in consecrated ground, so they had to dig him up and remove him because pettiness is a thing. So you've got there were quite a few Reform guys. John Wycliffe was one of them. John Huss, or Jan Hus, John, was another one. So this guy's dead already, so they exhume his body. This guy, okay, so lest you think that this council is like, finally, they're getting back to like good stuff and they're reforming things, awesome. Well, Huss was a guy who actually, a lot of his stuff, you're going to hear about it and you're going to say, like, that sounds very much like Martin Luther. They asked him, because he had fled, I think, to Prague, because he was very anti-pope and a lot of other stuff. So they're like, hey, John, why don't you come to this council so you can explain yourself? Don't worry, safe passage. We'll grant you safe passage. Just come here. We want you just to tell us what it is that you're saying here. And he's like, okay. So he comes to where the council is. Immediately they imprison him. Before the trial even starts, they throw him in prison, rush him through a trial, and then they burn him at the stake as a heretic. So the whole reform idea gets off to a wonderful start there.
Is that happening in Rome? Is that where Martin?
Hey, Matt, where was John Huss burned? I like having my fact checker right up there. Burned what? Well, at the stake, yeah. Where was the stake? Fun fact about burning it. Do you know why they burned heretics at the stake? Oh, this is ironic as all hell. Because it was against canon law for clergymen to spill blood. Which I think is a perfect example of obeying the letter of the law and not the spirit. Like, oh, we're not supposed to spill blood? Well, if you burn them to a crisp, they can't bleed. Which I don't think is true. I'm pretty sure they bleed.
Why is the word Wycliffe so familiar?
John Wycliffe?
No, just Wycliffe.
Yeah.
Is that what it is, a publisher?
Yeah. Because John Wycliffe, he started to translate the Bible into English. That was his not his claim to fame, but one of them. John Wycliffe. We got like 6 minutes. Apparently,
as well at the stake?
no. Wycliffe was not. I don't think he was burned. I don't think he was executed. Hey, Matt. So, Matt, first, where's Constance, and then how did Wycliffe die? I'm almost positive he wasn't executed. I think John Huss was the only one who was.
I remember a story about John Huss when he was being burned at the stake. He had a word of prophecy for the church that if you burn me, in 100 years a phoenix is going to rise out of this fire.
Oh, really? Oh,
And referring to Martin Luther.
that could be.
Martin V died in Rome.
Martin. Oh, well, John Wycliffe, though. Where did he die? Yeah, we got a horse race here between Matt online and and Lee here.
Where did John Wycliffe die?
Wow. Wycliffe died of a stroke in England. There we go. So natural causes.
That coroner's
I don't know what the Pope was doing. I don't know, but he had a role in any. John Wycliffe was a master at Oxford University. He was a parish vicar for the last 20 years of his life. He was one of these guys who started to kind of reform-minded. And this was, especially after the schism. So the schism, we're talking about the 2 popes and the 3 popes, which, to be fair, like anybody would be like, really, this is what we're doing? Because they're all like, well, you're not the Pope, I'm the Pope. So, and there was a lot of like, hey guys, especially, I keep erasing my stuff, the Franciscans and the Dominicans, it was kind of this idea of like, hey, let's get back to kind of how it used to be, the focus of how the church is supposed to focus on. So there was that kind of rumblings of like, hey, I think the church might have lost its way. And the schism might have been kind of the last straw, that anybody who was even trying to pretend that things weren't all screwed up were like, well, okay, yeah, this is screwed up. So when a schism breaks out, this is when I think Wycliffe kind of jumps up. Constance. So Huss was burned in southern Germany. Thank you. So some of the things that Wycliffe held to was that the true Church of Christ was that which reflected true Christian morality, which, especially with these popes, was kind of a clear shot against them. In fact, based on the conduct of the popes, this was fun. He declared the popes were limbs of Lucifer, and he labeled them as antichrists, which is what Luther did. He said the Bible alone was the source of all authority in the church and should be read by all the faithful, which is why he started to translate it into English. So again, that's exactly what Luther was saying too, right? Here was fun. Membership in the true church, so Christ's body. We're not talking about the Roman Catholic Church, but the true church, Christ's body. To become a member of that was by divine predestination. It was by grace alone. Okay? Pious works, whatever you did, whatever you bought, whatever anything else, had no relation to salvation whatsoever. So again, you've got that foundation of like, hey, this is a God thing and not a works thing. He attacked things like clerical celibacy, indulgences. He had some issues with transubstantiation. So he actually, like a lot of what John Wycliffe was going against, a lot of the same stuff Martin Luther was going against. So very much the same. And this was 100 years, 120, 130 years before Martin Luther. John Huss. So that was in England. John Huss is in Bohemia, which is what? Is Czechoslovakia still a place? Okay. I don't know which Eastern European countries are still countries anymore. What am I thinking of? Oh, Yugoslavia. That's gone, right? That's been gone for a while. Okay.
Yeah.
They became, yeah, they're somebody else. Czech Republic, yeah. Thank you, Matt. It used to be where there'd just be like a few random comments here. Now every week I've got all these fact checks from Matt on my. That's awesome. We got to like send him a little care package, like send him some advanced goodies so he can eat while we're. You need some benefit. We need to give you something, a little consideration for your work.
I thought you said you were going to pay him.
Send me the Big B coupons. Anyway, so John Huss is in Bohemia. He was influenced by John Wycliffe. So he read a lot of John Wycliffe, so that influenced him a lot. Critical of the papacy and of the church. I think it was a lot of it was prompted by John the 13th or 23rd. Sorry, John the 23rd started, or at least initiated. I don't know if it was the first or just another campaign to raise money through indulgences. So indulgences are being sold, and John Huss doesn't like that at all. He says that the true church was not identical to the Roman church, which that's a straight shot against the Pope. Because, the Roman church is the only church. And he's saying no. John Huss basically said, no, it's part of the church. Like, the Roman church might be a part of a church, the church, but it's not the church. He had the audacity to suggest that popes in the past have contradicted one another, which, well, I guess I'm thinking of all the ones where like, I depose you. No, I depose you. And they would all just say, well, he's not the real pope. He can't do it. But anyway, popes contradicted each other. He suggested that popes could err, that they weren't infallible. Shocking. 1412, he was excommunicated. And then that's when he was called to that council where they said, oh, don't worry, we won't hurt you. And then they burn him. So that's all going on right 100 some odd years before Martin Luther. So I'm going to pause and look through, see if I missed anything fun. Any questions about any of this? Yes. What's going on in Ireland?
Yeah.
We're having a great old time. During that time, well, shoot, St. Patrick was in the, 800s? Matt! When was St. this is terrible that I'm letting my ancestors are crying out. Yeah, I think St. Patrick was in the 800s. So what's going on around then? I mean, they've always had their own deal. They always do their own thing. So, I mean, there's going to be issues with Britain at some point. So, you know, they've always had problems. Yeah. So we could do a whole class on Ireland. I mean, I'm fine with that. This is important history that you should be aware of. All you need to know about Ireland at that time, just go watch the movie Braveheart and pay attention to the Irish guy. That's all you need to know. That was the greatest character in any movie ever. Love that guy. 5th or 6th century? Really? I was that far off? Okay, well, forget what I said.
Went there in 433.
Really? I was like 400 years off? Oh,
That's close.
close enough. I thought it was later. No, yeah, I guess it would have been earlier. Okay. Far be it from me. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, Braveheart. Yeah, great character there. To find his equal, an Irishman has to converse with the Almighty. That's a great movie. All right, let's see. What else could I throw at you here?
So I got a question about the Fourth Lateran Council. So you said that it was said that
Oh, I forgot about them.
Christians had to at least have communion at least once a year,
Yes.
right? Were they doing, like, do you know, was a service like basically the Mass at that point where, like, so like the priest or whatever would have been having communion, but like nobody else would have?
Yeah, could have been. Yeah. There were times where well, and the fun thing was that like a mass could be, you know, you could have a mass held and not be there. And that was also kind of thing is like you can, you know, for a donation to a priest or whatever, he could hold a mass for whoever, your aunt, uncle, whatever. So he would hold a mass. You didn't have to be there. You just kind of, you know, give your offering. They'd hold a mass for whatever purpose. So it wasn't, you didn't necessarily have to be there. The whole conduct of the mass oftentimes was, you know, kind of the big thing. One of the things that Luther kind of initiates with is, you know, the boisterous singing and the loud kind of like speaking out, because a lot of times, you know, when a priest is like doing the words of institution, he's whispering them or speaking very softly, doing it like he's doing the work up there. You know, a lot of times, you know, during these masses, the people are spectators more than anything. And then you've got issues like, you know, receiving the sacrament in one kind. So either just receiving the host and not the wine. And so there was that where I believe the idea there is that, you know, you wanted to be careful with the wine because you could spill it. And you didn't want to spill the blood of Christ because in transubstantiation, it's literally the blood of Christ. So, you know, you wouldn't want to just let somebody possibly, you know, slosh it onto the floor. So you just give them the body, and then the priest would, you know, do that. There was, I believe, the practice of like placing the host into a person's mouth. I believe that was because some people were doing was they take the host and they take it back to their house. They wouldn't eat it, but they take it back to their house and they'd either put it in a little safe spot or a little tabernacle kind of thing, and basically treat it like as a lucky talisman because it's the actual body of Christ. It's his body. So, hey, if I take Christ's body and have it in my house, good things will happen to me. So they didn't like that because, you know, you don't want to turn communion into a superstitious voodoo ceremony. So there were a lot of weird practices like that. And so there was weird stuff. So either the people weren't taking part in it, or they didn't feel they didn't have to. So A lot of fun. Maybe I should do that next Sunday. Just you all have your hands out, and I'm like, no, I'm putting it in your mouth. So, well, you can't take it home. Or I could just do a warning beforehand. It's like, now don't take this home. You got to eat it here. Okay, well, we ran out of time here. But so next time we'll talk a little bit about some of the reforming groups that were around at that time. And then we'll get into some Luther stuff. Finally, we'll get to the Reformation. The Waldensians, which they were considered a heretical group, but they were the ones who wanted to return back to a simpler form of Christianity, like, hey, let's get back to preaching and reading the Bible and not so much heavy-handed church organization. They also rejected purgatory. Can't imagine why. So they rejected a lot of what the Pope said. So the Pope declared them heretics. We got a couple other groups that either the Pope excommunicated and declared heretics and excommunicated, or launched a mini crusade against and slaughtered them all. So, fun stuff. Which is why, when Martin Luther comes around, why, being a reformer was kind of dicey proposition. Things did not go well for reform. The church tried to. They made some strides, but it's like, I don't know, trying to push back a tidal wave. It's just like you can only do so much. But yeah, there's a lot of foolishness going on. Any other questions? And this is very basic, very generalized. There's so much more involved in all this. So, if I'm skipping over or glossing over, sorry, I had to. There's just too much. Okay, gotcha. All right, so that's it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Your check's in the mail. And we'll be back next week.